Well, welcome viewers. I'm Dr. J.W.A., theologist since 1994. We're doing the life of Muhammad and the verified revelation structure of the people of the book. Episode 11, the expansion of the new Islamic ideology structure system. Viewers, in the previous episode, Muhammad's emerging Islamic ideology revelation structure began consolidating around preservation, obedience, legitimacy, and authority stabilisation. In this episode, the structure begins extending itself outward through expansion, because once authority stabilises successfully, systems naturally move beyond survival. They begin pursuing reach, influence, continuation, civilization permanence. And at first, expansion can appear inspiring, purposeful, unifying, even hopeful, especially for those who already carry deep psychological, spiritual, relational, and existential investment inside this new structure itself. Because growth often feels validating, numbers feel reassuring, momentum feels persuasive, and expansion creates the appearance of confirmation. And over time, the atmosphere itself begins teaching the followers something powerful. If the structure continues growing, many people instinctively assume legitimacy must already be settled. But that psychological mechanism matters enormously, because influence and verification are not identical categories. Yet, historically, they are often emotionally fused together, especially once authority structures begin carrying identity, belonging, historical meaning, future expectation, and existential purpose. And once expansion begins accelerating, viewers, questioning can quietly start feeling increasingly disruptive to collective momentum itself. Not always openly, just sometimes atmospherically. People begin protecting the movement emotionally before they consciously realise they are doing it. The nervous system adapts there too. Celebration reinforces loyalty. Acceptance reinforces belonging. Participation reinforces identity. And eventually the structure itself begins producing emotional safety through participation in the expanding system. And that's where dependency deepens subtly, not necessarily through visible coercion, through psychological attachment, through relational reward, through fear of separation from the meaning now attached to the structure itself. And the atmosphere changes there again. Success stories circulate, growth becomes evident, expansion becomes reassurance, and slowly the listener begins noticing that non-participation increasingly feels emotionally heavier than participation. And that behavioural shift becomes critically important once expansion itself starts functioning psychologically as perceived validation. Because rapid growth may demonstrate influence. It does not independently establish prophetic continuity, however. Viewers, the Qur'an repeatedly frames expansion, struggle, and collective identity formation around submission and obedience structures. Qur'an 9:33 reads, "It is He who sent His messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion." And that expansion pressure matters enormously because once civilization growth begins surrounding a revelation structure, the emotional cost of questioning often rises alongside the movement's increasing influence, especially once future hope, identity, community and meaning have all become intertwined together inside the expanding framework. And viewers, the pressure intensifies there because the individual is no longer merely evaluating isolated theological claims. Now the person risks psychological separation from belonging, certainty, purpose, relational security, inherited meaning, even future identity. And once those structures fuse together deeply enough, self-censorship frequently begins before external correction is ever required. Questions become internally negotiated first. Doubts become privately managed. Silence becomes emotionally safer than visible uncertainty. And that mechanism appears repeatedly throughout authority history, especially inside systems where expansion itself begins functioning as emotional reinsurance. It was because once the structure becomes psychologically associated with stability, future hope, and collective meaning, disagreement can begin feeling emotionally dangerous long before punishment ever becomes visible. You see, the nervous system learns anticipation. The room teaches caution. Acceptance becomes rewarding. And distance begins feeling costly. And eventually, many individuals begin protecting the atmosphere itself, because the atmosphere now protects their emotional stability in return. Now, that reciprocal dependency structure becomes extraordinarily powerful, not merely theological, not merely psychological, not merely rational or existentially. Yet the unresolved questions still remain standing beneath the expansion itself. Does expanding influence independently verify that Muhammad's new emerging Islamic ideology revelation structure truly aligns with the already established prophetic witness carried among the people of the book? Or has influence progressively become emotionally fused to legitimacy before continuity testing has fully been concluded. And viewers, that distinction matters enormously because throughout biblical revelation structure, truth was never established merely through expansion, numbers, momentum, or civilization reach. Claims remained accountable to prior revelation, prophetic continuity, chronology, and most of all, verification under these umbrellas. And again, we have the example where the Bereans examined claims carefully against Scripture rather than surrendering discernment to expanding influence or collective momentum in Acts 17:11. The pattern remains critically important now because movements may grow, structures may expand, civilizations may strengthen. But verified revelation still survives examination without requiring fear, pressure, emotional dependency, or expanded momentum to protect it. Viewers, and once emotional safety begins depending upon preserving the structure itself, discernment often narrows silently inside the atmosphere long before individuals fully recognise what was happening. I'm Dr. J.W.A., viewers, theologist since 1994. I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe to encourage the channel. Ring the bell if you like the content. I'm sure if you subscribe and like, you'll ring the bell. Comment to educate me and share the video to help somebody else. In the next episode, viewers, I'm going to move into the weight of inherited identity. Because once expansion stabilizes across generations, identity itself begins inheriting the structure before examination ever personally begins. And I'll see you then. Bye for now.